Welcome to Magers Quinn. Thank you all for coming out tonight. I'm really excited to have three authors in the store at once. We're going to hear from Jodzio and Dessa and David Philip Mullins. They'll all be reading. We won't do the traditional Q&A afterwards because we're doing this cocktail party style. I encourage you to stay afterwards and chat the authors up, get your books signed, find out their writing processes or whatever else you want to hear about from them. So after we're done, just stick around, please. We do events in the store here all the time, so I hope to see you back. If you got a seat, you got a flyer, but if you didn't, I want to make sure you know. June 14th, we're going to have Bob Mould in the store, lead singer of Hooster Doo and Sugar and solo musician. He's got his autobiography coming out on the 15th, and at 9 o'clock the night before, you can see him right here, reading from it and signing copies. So help us spread the word. We got it at sort of short notice, but he'll be here. It's free, all ages, if you will. On July 15th, we're going to have Sapphire in the store. She's a novelist and poet who wrote the book Push that became the movie Precious. And she is back with a sequel to that called The Kid. She'll be here on the 15th. And on July 19th, an author named Donald Ray Pollock is going to be here. If you like Chuck Palahniuk, you'll like Donald Ray Pollock. In fact, so much so that they toured together. When Chuck came to town 3 years ago, Donald Ray Pollock was his opening act, if you will. He wrote a really good short story collection called Knock 'em Stiff that came out in 2008, and he's got a full-scale novel coming out now called Devil All the Time. He'll be here in the store on the 19th of July. Really good, dark fiction. Funny, funny stuff. I really recommend it. So, all our events are free. Sign up for our newsletter. Talk to anybody wearing one of these. Find us on Facebook. Stalk us on Twitter. Whatever you like. Anybody who's in back, if you want to come in, there's still some space down the middle or in the corner back here. But you're welcome. Yeah, either way is fine. You can come around either side. Okay, so without any further ado, we'll kick it off with David Philip Mullins.
So I'll begin by thanking Magers Quinn for having me, and thanks to all of you for coming. I really appreciate it. I live in Omaha, and we never get crowds like this at local books. This is fantastic. We usually have about 5 or 10 people at our readings, so this is really great. So Greetings from Below is a collection of linked short stories. It can basically be read as a novel. They're arranged chronologically. Each story can certainly be read as kind of a separate autonomous thing, but if you read it straight through, kind of has the expansiveness and the arc of a novel, at least I hope. What kind of connects the whole book is that all the stories revolve around this guy named Nick Danzy. He's the protagonist. There are 4 major conflicts in the book. So the first is when Nick is relatively young, he's about 20 years old, his dad dies. And shortly after that he develops these sexual fixations or fetishes. He's not quite sure where they've come from, but the book kind of hints that they're attributed to his father's death in some way or another. In addition, he's dating a woman named Annie throughout the book, who he loves as a friend or as a cousin, that sort of thing, but he's not romantically attracted to her in any way, so he's not in love with her. And so he's kind of dealing with that conflict throughout most of the book. And then finally, his mother develops certain addictions of her own. So first to smoking, then to shopping, finally to drinking pure cane sugar straight out of the box, much the way an alcoholic would drink, say, rubbing alcohol or something of that sort. And so again, her addiction, similar to Nick's, seemed to kind of come from her grief and from the death of the father/husband in the book. The stories are quite long, so I don't usually read a whole story. I'll read just the first section of the first story of the book. It's called Arboretum. It shouldn't take me too long. I know that secretly nobody ever really wants to go to a reading anyway, so this will take 15-20 minutes. Okay. Oh, and by the way, Donald Ray Pollock is awesome. You guys should come to that reading. That book, Knock 'em Stiff, is one of my favorites. It's fantastic. Okay. Arboretum. The saplings stood in neat rows along Eastern Avenue, each leafless maple growing from a dark hump of soil that resembled a pitcher's mound or a small grave. They rose 6-7 feet above the sidewalk. With flashlights and a trowel, we uprooted the shortest one we could find and carried it off to our plywood fort in the desert. I was in my early teens. It was late on a Sunday, and I had left my house in the middle of the night without permission. Surrounded by cat claws and schist rocks, the fort was a rickety structure that sat stark and uninviting in the middle of a dried-up arroyo. Kilberg had said that all the outside needed was a little greenery, a few trees. Earlier that evening, I had learned that my father was going to die, and I was glad to be out in the open, away from home. Kilberg had convinced me to sneak out my bedroom window, to meet him at the end of our block at 11:15. Now he had me on my hands and knees, scooping rocks and hard-packed dirt, baked solid after a rainless winter. The drought that had begun in December had yet to subside. This was more than 25 years ago, before interstate water banking, and people joked that their faucets might soon run dry. Summer was 2 months away, but even out at the fort, a 20-minute walk into the Mojave wilderness that bordered our neighborhood to the south, the warm air had begun to smell of the chlorinated swimming pools and freshly mowed lawns that were partially at fault for the city's water shortage. Beside me, Kilberg massaged his aching stump. He could only stand for so long before he had to remove his prosthetic leg, a hollow, plastic thing, a mannequin's appendage, from which he sometimes drank from the Bushmills whiskey I borrowed from my father's liquor cabinet. "I don't know about you, but I sure could use some action," said Kilberg. The leg lay beneath him in the dirt. He sat crouched on it as though it were a log at a campfire. It had once matched the color of his skin, but had faded to an unnatural ivory. In one hand he held a flashlight, and with the other he kneaded his stump in a slow figure 8, avoiding the spot in the center where the skin had been knotted together like the end of a hot dog. "Action?" I asked. I scooped a clump of dirt over my shoulder and it hit the ground like a stale dinner roll. What kind of action? The sapling was propped against the overturned paint bucket we used as a bongo drum. Behind us, the fort stood at an angle, leaning westward, undeserving of its name. It wasn't fortified in any way and appeared on the verge of collapse. Deep in what seemed an uncharted region of the Mojave, there were no trails, no cigarette butts or empty beer bottles, left behind by the local high school kids who partied in the desert, and concealed by the arroyo's high, crumbling banks. It was at least unknown to the rest of the world. Building the fort had been Kilberg's idea. We had spent an entire Saturday wrestling with the sheets of plywood we had found in his father's tool shed, shaping a door frame with his ancient jigsaw, and dragging the sheets one by one through the desert to hammer them together. And in the end, our construction was nothing more than 4 unpainted walls and a low, flat roof, less complex than your average doghouse. Kilberg shook his head at the ground, the way he did whenever I asked him a question. "Action," he said. "Chicks. Jesus, do I have to explain everything?" "Oh," I said, and felt like an idiot. Travis Kilberg was tall and muscular, with long earlobes and a wide, open face. He wore a military buzz cut, and it seems to me now that his complexion always had a greenish tint to it, like the patina of an old bronze statue, his eyes dark and serious. Kilberg had diabetes and had lost his leg at the age of 6 due to a blocked artery. He liked to talk about sex, about the many girls whose virginity he had taken, though I knew that he himself was a virgin. We both were. We were 14 years old. Neither of us had ever even kissed anyone. Kilberg was perhaps incapable of honesty, no matter what the topic, and I played along when he fabricated his exploits, nodding as he spun tales of seduction and conquest. I stabbed the trowel into the dirt, leaning to grab a few pebbles from the hole. I didn't mind doing all the work. It took my thoughts off the news my parents had delivered over dinner. According to my father's doctor, a rare lung condition, a fibrosis, was responsible for his chronic cough, for his labored breathing, which in the last couple of months had grown louder and raspier. "Talk to him, Jack," my mother said. "He has a right to know." My father explained that his lungs were in bad shape, their tissue inflamed. Without at least one transplant, he told me, swallowing the words as he chewed, the fibrosis could prove fatal. "Will," my mother corrected him. "Will prove fatal. We just want you to understand what's going on, Nick." The only person I had ever known to die had been my grandfather on my mother's side, who had had a heart attack 2 summers earlier. After a long silence, my mother suggested we move to California, near the Scripps Research Institute in La Jolla. My father's doctor, a general practitioner, had told him that the respiratory specialists there were among the foremost in the world. Tearfully, my mother reminded my father that because of his age, 43, his name would be placed near the bottom of a long waiting list for a new lung. He needed a specific